We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! I'm Yuruzi. Here's part 10 of What If Naruto Studied Fuinjutsu. While exploring the Team 7 training ground, a young Naruto happens to stumble across a strangely shaped kunai embedded in a tree. Years of frustration and deciphering later, he finally cracks the Fuinjutsu formula hidden along the handle to surprising and painful results. At the same time, a ghost of the Otsutsuki sets in motion a plan to end his family's eternal conflict. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 40, Trial of the Empress. 4 years earlier. Kitsuyan. How much longer do I have to wear this thing? It itches. I highly doubt that, and a couple more hours I'm afraid. Be a trooper and push through it. We're almost there. Naruto humphed and tugged at the hem of his new, black kimono that Kitsune had graciously purchased for him that morning. He never liked getting dressed up. On the rare occasions that Gigi brought him to some special function or dinner, he would be forced to wear some hand-me-down from Gigi's son. Kimonos always made him feel vulnerable. They were just too light, and he detested the drafty feeling down below. Fine. Where are we heading anyway? He asked as he gave up fiddling with him. My place. The 8-year-old boy waited for him to elaborate, but quietly fell in step beside him when he realized he wasn't going to get any more information. While they made their way through the village, Naruto tended to linger closer to Kitsune's side than he usually would. As with every year, the angry stares and whispers seemed to be more frequent and hostile on this day in particular. While no one shouted anything towards the duo as they passed by, there was a clear edge of hostility in the air. As they passed a bar, one tipsy man, who had decided to start celebrating earlier, rose up to throw out a comment, but was quickly silenced once he realized who the ANBU alongside the boy was. After 15 minutes of walking, they finally arrived at a small cluster of buildings near the Hokage residence that typically housed off-duty ANBU. While most agents slept in the ANBU barracks during their rotations, even the ANBU needed a place to retreat to after the stress their line of work tended to create. With a swipe of blood on the door handle, Kitsune creaked open the wooden frame and motioned Naruto to follow him inside. Naruto took one step inside and sneezed from the dust kicked up in the air from their arrival. As he looked around, even he could tell that Kitsune never really spent much time here. The dressers were covered in dust, and there was even a cobweb in one of the windows. Geez, Kitsune. You really need to clean up this place. That's rich coming from you. What state would we find your room in if we went there right now? Fine, Naruto mumbled as he tried to find a place to sit that wouldn't coat his new clothes in dust. Besides, there's no point. I'm never really here that often anyway, Kitsune replied as locked the door behind him. It was true. Whenever he was forced to take breaks by the Hokage, he would simply spend his time resting in the ANBU barracks. If he ever had any free time, it was spent doing 3 things: eating, sleeping, and training. His co-workers may have found it dreadfully dull, but it mattered little to him. He had a job to do, and he would spend every waking moment he had to ensure he could accomplish it. Speaking of which, he turned and faced the young boy, who had finally taken a seat after wiping off a stool at the counter and was staring back at him expectantly. So, what are we doing here? The boy asked as he swung his legs and glanced around the room. You're receiving your birthday present. Wait here, Kitsune replied as he made his way towards his bedroom. After making sure the door was shut tight, he placed his hand on the wall behind the door, illuminating a storage seal. As he reopened the door, Naruto was surprised to see he wasn't holding a present. Instead, Kitsune held a long, thin scroll. Its parchment was withered and faded, and there were some obvious tears along the edges. The blonde noted the obvious dirt stains, and felt a little disheartened by the sight. What was so important about a crummy, old scroll? What is it? Something very special. This is the only link I still have to my family. Technically, it was something passed down to me, and now, I'm willing to share it with you. Kitsune was silent as he let his statement sink in. If you are granted permission, I would like to allow you to sign this summoning contract. Naruto watched with wide eyes as the boy flashed through 5 hand signs and slammed his hand on the ground. The boy yelped as the smoke dissipated, revealing a massive red and gold fox that was roughly the size of Kitsune. The fox fixed its gaze on him and began sniffing the air as it approached him. Naruto tried to back away, but ended up leaning too far back, causing him and the stool to come crashing down. He groaned as he rubbed his back, and squeaked when he realized the massive fox was right in his face. The boy trembled but remained perfectly silent as the fox sniffed at him. It prodded him with its snout, before it started licking him all over his face. Naruto giggled and reached out to pet the massive animal that was assaulting him with affection. Kitsune felt his lip curl up as he watched the two interact. After a minute of coddling the boy, the massive fox turned around to face him, and said, "Huli is ready for you. He'll be calling us shortly. Thanks, Ryoma." Naruto's eyes were the size of saucers as he stared up at the fox above him. "Did that fox just," he started to say before all three went up in a puff of smoke. "Talk?" Naruto stopped mid-sentence as he realized he was no longer in Kitsune's apartment. Ryoma happily moved out of his way, as Naruto pushed himself onto his feet. His eyes tried to adjust to the sudden change in light. The light from the fireplace dimly illuminated the room, but it was very hard for him to full orient himself. He gazed around the tiny room with wooden walls and flooring, and was surprised by the root that jutted through the ceiling into the floor. He noted the table sitting in the corner of the room and was confused by the tiny chairs and table height. What just happened? "Ah, the guest of the hour has arrived," a voice called out behind him. He turned around and was shocked to see another fox smiling up at him. This one had gray fur and four tails swirling behind its back, and instead of walking on all fours, it strolled forward its hind legs with a walking stick in hand. That one can talk too." Naruto cried out as he squatted down to the elder's level. "That is so cool." Huli chuckled before waving off Kitsune, who had started to bow. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Naruto-kun. Kitsune here has told me quite a lot about you." "My name is Huli," the old fox chirped as he reached out his paw. "Nice to meet you, Huli-jiji," Naruto replied with a smile as he shook the tiny fox's paw. "So they assigned us our time?" Kitsune asked over his shoulder. "Indeed. The council is going to busy with a certain case for the next hour, but we are expected to show up around 2 o'clock. That should give you plenty of time to finish your business," Huli replied. "What business?" Naruto asked, turning towards the older boy. "Sorry, but Ryoma and I have some errands we need to run before the ceremony. It's just some paperwork we have to drop off before we can actually present you to Lady Shi. Do you have it ready, Huli-sama?" Yes. 1 second, it's down in my study." "Let me go and fetch it," the old fox said with a wave of his hand as he headed off deeper into the burrow. "What am I supposed to do for 2 hours?" Naruto whined after Huli disappeared. "Don't worry. Huli-sama will keep you company. He'll probably give you a tour of the city in the meantime," Kitsune responded, getting down on one knee. "Now you behave for him. He was very generous to help us here. Do you understand?" "Fine," Naruto huffed, before Kitsune ruffled his hair. "Now, why don't you go play with Ryoma, while we wait?" "Sir," Naruto started before the giant fox scooped him up and flipped him on its back. Naruto giggled as the large fox spun around the living room, trying its best not to knock anything over. "Here it is," Huli called out as he entered the room, handing Kitsune a wrapped parcel. "That should suffice. I'm sure she'll be pleased with my selection." Kitsune nodded and stared at the duo playing in the foyer. Naruto giggled as Ryoma bounced back and forth across the floor. "What do you think of our odds?" Kitsune asked quietly. "Honestly, I believe Lady Shi will find him acceptable. Around 70% in our favor if you really wanted to put a number to it, but, well, it also depends on how she may react if she notices his tenant." "What then?" "Then I'd say 50/50ths. "What?" he angrily whispered. "Don't worry," the old fox chuckled as he waved him off. "I've set some wheels in motion that should tip the scales in our favor. Just trust this old fox." "Now you wanted me to hold on to something," Kitsune nodded. After making sure Naruto was fully distracted with Ryoma, he handed the short fox the disheveled scroll. "Lady Shi won't tolerate this arrangement anymore, especially if she approves him, so I need you to look after it. Consider it done. I know how precious it is for you." "I'll take good care of it," he replied before collapsing the tiny scroll into a tiny black mark atop his cane. Kitsune was silent, but finally nodded and whistled for Ryoma. The fox immediately sprung up and shot over to his side. "Naruto! We're leaving." Naruto jogged over, trying to wipe away the slobber from his face. "Alright, let's get going. Allow me to present to you the Forest of Eternal Fall." Huli smiled as he pushed open the round door to his den. Naruto blinked at the sudden rush of light, but after his eyes adjusted, he felt his breath hitch in his chest. It was stunning. The trees were simply massive. The width of each one was about the size of a city block. The ground and trees were littered in red and orange leaves, making the tree trunks pop out. In fact, as he gazed around, all he could see was orange, orange, and more orange. The vibrant leaves shrouded the woods and stretched as far as the eye could see. He craned his neck looking up as he tried to see the top. Beautiful, isn't it? Huli asked as he stood next to the boy. Yeah. Naruto stood in stunned silence for over a minute as he took in the sight. Come on. It's about a 5-minute walk to town, Huli said as he took his place at the head of the group. As they hiked away from Huli's burrow, a tiny head popped up from behind the roots of the tree. Its head cocked to the side and its tail began to wag as it caught sight of the small, blonde boy smiling up at the trees. It quietly crawled out from the shade, and darted from tree to tree, tailing the group as they went on their way. Wow! It was astonishing to say the least. Ryoma had not truly prepared him for how big some of these foxes were. While the majority was the normal size he was used to, some even dwarfed Ryoma by 10 feet. His gaze lingered on a particular red and blue one, but he quickly glanced away after it noticed him and started to bare its teeth. To be honest, he wasn't exactly receiving the most open welcome. From the moment he had set foot in the settlement, every fox he had passed seemed to be on high alert due to his presence. Now he was used to dirty looks. He got them every day back home, but this felt different. In the village, he could tell that they always blamed him for something, but these looks seemed to be directed at something else. They're not angry at you, Huli spoke up, as if reading his thoughts. Could have fooled me, the boy muttered as every head seemed to follow his trail. Well, they're not exactly mad at you. They're just cautious. The Fox clan doesn't exactly have the greatest track record with humans. What do you mean? Huli chuckled. Well, as you may know, humans love to hunt, and when you have a fur coat as lustrous as ours, it tends to draw negative attention. Huli gazed up at him. For 200 years, mankind hunted down the foxes in droves, to the point where we simply couldn't stay in our normal homes. An alliance was built and we were forced to leave our old forests behind and retreat here, where we have been hidden ever since. When was that? Naruto asked. Oh, about 11,000 years ago, give or take. Things certainly must have changed since then. From time to time. About every 200 years, the idea to expand is thrown around, but it's always dismissed. Better to remain here hidden among the other summons where it's safe. Just too much lingering resentment among the elders. Huli then snorted and glanced up at him. Plus the humans aren't exactly helping their case. From your folklore portraying us tricksters, to more recent events such as the Kyuubi attack, foxes aren't exactly held in a positive light with your people. Huli was silent, before following up, and before you ask, no, there isn't really a connection between us and the Kyuubi. None. None. Well, he may have been molded after us, but that's a different story. Naruto raised his eyebrow in confusion. What do you mean? Another time perhaps. It's a long story, and I'm sure you would be bored by the details of an old sage. Oops. Hold up, Kitsune cut off, stopping Naruto with his cane. Naruto was about to ask why when he suddenly felt the ground shake beneath his feet. He glanced to his right and fell backwards in shock at the sight of the creature roaming towards him. As its shadow fell across his face, Naruto's mouth fell open as the colossal fox made its way between the trees. The thing made Ryoma look like an ant. It was huge. What? How? How is it so large? Naruto stuttered as he watched the beast walk away. Not every species of fox is the same, my boy. It all depends on what clan you come from, which genetics you inherit and whatnot. Those larger varieties tend to hail from the more battle-oriented families. As you can see, they tend to grow quite large. You don't say, the 8-year-old whispered in wonder. Huli poked him in the stomach and lightly bopped his nose with his cane. Close your mouth or a bug will fly right in. Now, let's be on our way. As Naruto followed behind the humming, old fox, he began to notice something strange. While most of the foxes were fixing their glares at him, he noticed he was not the only one receiving negative attention. Huli-Gigi, Emichem, why are the foxes glaring at you? Is it because you're with me? Huli simply glanced at the surrounding crowd and shrugged it off. Well, that may be part of the reason, but that's not entirely why. He chuckled as he glanced up at the boy who had caught up alongside him. Let's just say, I may not be the most popular figure in the village. But I thought you were one of the elders. Oh, I am, and it drives the council mad every day, he chuckled. While they respect my experience without a doubt, that doesn't mean they have to like me. They tend to see me as too soft for their liking. Too soft. Let's say that I'm one of the more diplomatic of the group. Since we have spent so much time by ourselves, the council isn't very trusting of the world outside of the forest, even of other summoning clans. What other clans are there? Naruto asked excitedly, who's closest? Oh, not many live near us besides two. There's a mountain to the west of here, whose caverns are home to a certain clan. To the east are the pigeons, although, if they had any brains, they would have moved years ago after finding out we were next door. Right as he said that, Naruto's stomach began to grumble, causing Huli to chuckle. I see your stomach is sharing in my sentiment. Well, we have some time. Why don't we stop for lunch? Oh. Can we get ramen? Naruto asked with stars in his eyes. Sorry, my boy, but I'm afraid we don't have that here. I want to go home now. Oh, come on now. I know a place around the corner that will be fine. We may not have ramen, but I believe we'll have something else that should satisfy you. Have you ever tried pheasant? By the way, Huli Gigi, why can't I just sign the scroll now? Naruto asked between mouthfuls. Huli bopped him on the head with his cane and waited for him to swallow before replying. It isn't quite that simply. You see, all potential summoners must first be approved by the reigning head of the clan, or boss summon, if you will. For the foxes, the decision falls to the reigning emperor or empress. Really? What are they like? Naruto asked before taking another bite. Huli was silent as he twiddled with his silverware. Lady, she can be very, well, she's not the most welcoming individual. She can be quite stern, and it's very hard to sway her from her decisions. Not to say that she can't be fair, but she tends to only listen to those who have truly gained her respect. How old is she? Naruto asked, before Huli smacked his hand with his cane, causing him to yelp in pain. Never ask about a woman's age, Naruto boy. It's considered rude. Anyways, to answer your question, she'll be turning 453 next spring. You're going to love the event. It's spectacular to witness. Naruto spit out his food and whipped around. 453. That's insane. You think that's old? She's actually considered quite young for her breed. She's about maybe a third of the way through her expected reign. What about you? Naruto asked. Me? Oh, for my kin, I'm getting up there. Around 824, give or take. Now, stop gawking. Your food is getting cold. The blonde was silent as he began pushing around the food on his plate. After a pause he turned and asked, Huli Gigi. When did Kitsune get to sign the contract? Huli stopped mid-drink and sat his cup back down. Young, very young. Even younger than you are now. Lady, she made a special exception for him due to peculiar circumstances. Huli was quiet, waiting to judge his reaction, but was surprised when the boy started giggling. A devious grin split apart his face as he turned to him and asked, So Kitsune was the last person to sign before me, right? Huli raised his eyebrow and nodded. I got you, Kitsune Baka. I'll finally get to see your name, he internally giggled as he rocked on his stool. Huli smiled and took one last sip before setting down his tip. Come along, Naruto. We have places to be. Our appointment is in about 30 minutes. With that, the pair thanked the chef and made their way out of the restaurant. As they walked out of the base of the tree, a tiny pair of yellow eyes peeked around the corner. After waiting several seconds, the dark shadow darted out from behind the trunk and weaved its way through the traffic after them. Huli made a slight glance behind him, and caught sight of the tiny shape as it slid behind the door of a market, leaving a swirl of orange leaves in its wake. The tip of his lips curled up ever so slightly as he resumed their march towards the largest tree at the center of town. As they drew closer and closer, Naruto could not help but be amazed by the towering stone doors that lay upon underneath the roots of the massive tree. As they reached the edge of the hole, he groaned as he glanced down at the ridiculous amounts of stairs that lead down the lantern-lit stairway. Oh, don't be such a baby. It's only 1,000 steps. I've outlived you 10 times, my boy, and you don't see me complaining. Let's go. As they made their way down the burrow, Naruto could not help but be amazed at the impressive structure work that went into the building this place. The roof stretched far above him, and without the aid of the lanterns lit along the walls, he wouldn't have been able to make out the ceiling. Finally, They made their way down to the bottom of the tunnel, and Naruto was even more shocked to find a marble floor waiting for them. Take a right. We should be meeting Kitsune outside of the council's chamber. After 5 minutes of walking, Naruto turned the corner to see Kitsune leaning against the stone columns in front of a large, bronze door. Right on time, he said as he caught sight of them. The council just finished their debate, and they're ready to start whenever we are. Good. Then let's get on with it, Huli chirpily replied as he made his way towards the double doors. Wait, hold on a second, Naruto yelped as panic started to creep in. What exactly am I supposed to? Quite standing around. Let's get this show on the road, the old fox called out as he pushed open the door. Kitsune sighed and just pushed Naruto along, despite his protests. Naruto braced himself as he was pushed through the double doors, but as he set his eyes on the council, he was a bit disappointed. After all the variously sized foxes he had seen today, the council seemed almost underwhelming. Around a large semicircular table were foxes of varying sizes, but the largest was no bigger than Naruto. Most were the same size as Huli. New case. 2:06 p.m. The council shall now address the case for a new applicant to make his mark on our summoning contract, the small turquoise fox in the center of the ring called out. The fox shot Naruto an uninterested look over his half-rimmed glasses. Lady, she wished for me to inform you that your offering was received and deemed fit. Offering? Naruto whispered. Just a tradition. It's considered impolite to request a meeting with the Empress without presenting a gift, Huli whispered back. I gave her a certain history book I've been holding in my library. She's been after it for years. Thought it may soften her up. Ahem. Despite previous debate, our current summoner has decided to execute his right as the current head summoner to propose a new applicant. Nominator, is your sponsor counselor or elder present? Right here, Huli happily replied, tapping his cane against the floor. The council seemed to shoot him a short glare, before turning their attention to Naruto, who tried to stand as straight as possible. Are both the nominator and sponsor aware of the risks of the proposal? We are, they replied in unison, causing Naruto to glance between them. Is the applicant prepared to accept any consequences should he be deemed unworthy? The fox asked as it peered over its desk. Ugh, was all he could reply as he glanced up at Kitsune. The boy remained quiet, but offered him an encouraging nod. Sure. I guess so. The fox let out a humph and stamped the piece of paper in front of him. Due to the rights granted to the head summoner, we the council, will allow your nomination to enter the presence of Lady Shi. You may enter the throne room and begin your trial. Thank you, honorable council, Kitsune replied with a bow, before prodding Naruto to follow him back out. As they made their way back down the corridor, Naruto was starting to get nervous. What did they mean about consequences? Huli-Gigi, yes? The old man replied, seemingly ignorant of the boy's distress. What exactly am I about to do? You are about to be in the presence of Lady Shi, and she is going to judge you to see if you are worthy of signing the scroll. How exactly is she going to do that? She is going to look into your very soul. She'll see every memory and decision you've ever made, and then measure your will and determination. Don't worry. While status is important, she does not really care about where one comes from. Work ethic is all she cares about. Hell, she had to climb over 2 of her own siblings to gain her throne. You should have nothing to worry about. And if she decides that I'm not the right fit? What then? Naruto asked hesitantly. Don't let that bother you. You'd be dead before you could even feel any pain. Naruto felt his blood turn ice cold, and was about to turn around and bolt. Before he could, he realized they had arrived. 2 bipedal foxes wearing thick crimson armor motioned them to follow, and lead Kitsune, Huli, and himself through the entry arch of the throne room. It was a massive marble room, whose ceiling stretched even further than he could see. Past the red carpet, the lead up the middle of the room was a giant, silk futon flanked by stone pillars with flames erupting from the top. Behind the seat were 2 thick, purple curtains that stretched across the entire room. As they reached the room's center, Huli and Kitsune bowed down to their knees. After a few seconds, Kitsune reached up and forced Naruto's head down. The chamber was silent. The only sound being the echoes from the fires burning across from them. Finally, a smooth, feminine voice rang throughout the hall. Applicant. Please step forward. Naruto had honestly never felt more scared in his life, but he shakenly started to rise and slowly walk about 10 feet away from the others. He stood perfectly still as he waited for this Lady Shi to appear. He wanted to glance backwards for some kind of reassurance from Kitsune, but a movement from behind the curtains caught his eye. As he glanced at the silk curtains, he could have sworn he caught a glimpse of white flash in the darkness. He gulped as a massive white tail, tipped with purple fur, swayed out from the curtains, slowly parting them before the massive form finally revealed itself. Naruto knew it was probably rude, but he couldn't help but stare. The sight was as awe-inspiring as it was terrifying. The massive fox from earlier in the village had nothing on her. She stood nearly triple its height and 5 times as long. He froze as he felt her massive purple eyes lock onto him. Without a word, she prowled her way across the throne room, obviously in no rush. With each step she took, any temptation he held to run was quickly overshadowed by his limbs seemingly locking up in place. Whether it was out of a feeling to see this through or fear, he didn't know. At the very least, he felt some comfort in the idea that Kitsune thought he was ready for this. It was up to him to prove the other right. Finally, the snow-white fox stopped and leaned in so that the tip of her nose was within an inch of his face. Her massive eyes bore down on him with such intensity that he couldn't move even if he wanted to. He was surprised when a small, purple fire seemed to appear in her eyes, and then suddenly, he felt his vision dim. Lady Shi was silent as the boy's memories played through her mind. All of the tragedy. All of the loneliness. All bundled up into 10 seconds. She was honestly impressed. That amount of torment would break most men, but here this child persevered and still stood with his head up. Although, she could tell that he still clung to some of his darker feelings deep within, the boy certainly had a will of fire. He would be just fine. She glanced over the boy at Huli, who held a smug look on his face, much to her annoyance. As she began to retreat from his mind, she paused. Her eyes narrowed and she began to sniff him. Shit! Kitsune internally cursed as he noticed her shift in demeanor. This was not going to be good. He slowly began to tense up and reach for his pouch, but felt Huli's hand clasp his wrist. Let things play out, he whispered, seemingly unworried by the events unfolding in front of them. This chakra, she mused as she delved back deeper and deeper into his mind. She pushed back into the furthest depths of his psyche, until finally, her eyes shot open as another face with slanted eyes grinned back at her within the darkness. You! Naruto yelped and fell back on his ass as Lady Shi reared back and growled at him. He frantically tried to say something, anything, but felt his words stuck in his throat. All he could do was try to scoot away as the massive creature let out a roar, bearing teeth the size of 10 men. He lay frozen as the massive beast opened its mouth and purple flames began to glow in its throat. Ah! Naruto whimpered, glancing back at the others. Shit! Kitsune cursed as he prepared to move, but Huli would not lighten his grip. Lady Shi roared and reared back her neck, fire erupting from the sides of her mouth. A small pair of yellow eyes hidden within the shadows of the throne room were wide in disbelief, and the small figure began darting out from its hiding place. As Lady Shi brought down her head, the tiny shadow came to a stop in front of Naruto and growled at her. Naruto winced as he awaited his fiery demise, but was surprised when it never came. Instead, he slowly lifted one eye and was shocked to see a tiny yellow and purple fox standing between him and the towering behemoth. Their eyes were locked in a non-verbal argument, but neither seemed willing to back down. Naruto couldn't help but notice the purple markings along the small fox matching those on the Empress. After another few seconds of silence, Lady Shi's glare returned and flames started pouring from her mouth again. The tiny fox seemed just as surprised as Naruto, her ear flattening against her head. It started to tremble, but held its ground, even as Lady Shi began taking a deep breath. Without even thinking, Naruto jumped forward and clasped the tiny creature in his arms. Turning his back to the Empress, and tried his best to shield the tiny fox with his body as best he could. He felt the heat of the flames tickle the back of his kimono for a solid minute, but was surprised when it retreated yet again. Intriguing, the feminine voice echoed throughout the room. Naruto glanced over his shoulder as the massive fox stepped away from him. The fox seemed to study him as she glanced between him and the tiny yellow ball of fur in his arms. Fine. I shall allow you to pass, for now. But know this, Naruto Uzumaki, she growled as she leaned down in his face, if any ill shall fall upon her, let this day be a constant reminder of what shall happen. She then shifted her glare onto the fox in his arms. And we will talk later. With that, she turned around and made her way back towards the massive futon at the end of the room. Well, I'd say that worked out better than expected, Huli chuckled as he walked up to the pair. What just happened? Naruto gulped, his eyes never leaving the form of Lady Shi as she eased into her bed. You passed my boy. Weren't you listening? Though I'm sure you have little Kimmy here to thank for that. For the first time, Naruto finally had a chance to really look at the small creature in his arms. The tiny yellow fox looked back up at him, eyes brimming with excitement. He glanced over her purple ears at her vigorously wagging tail. Yay! I have a new summoner. She cheered as she rubbed against his neck and climbed her way around his shoulders. Ugh, okay, Naruto weakly chuckled as she rubbed her face against his cheek. Kitsune finally let out the sigh he had been holding and made his way over to the trio. Let's get this over with so we can head home. I think we've had enough stress for one day, he muttered as he made his way toward Lady Shi. He bowed before her throne, before slightly lifting his mask to bite his thumb. After 5 hand signs, he slammed his hand into the ground, revealing the sealing contract. After receiving a nod from her, he made his way back up the corridor and stopped in front of Naruto. So, ugh, what do I have to do? You need to sign it in your own blood, Kitsune replied as he rolled out the paper. Gross, Naruto flinched, but bit his finger like Kitsune did and waited as Kitsune passed the paper in front of him. Excitement finally rooted away the fear as he realized his big moment over his shepherd was at hand. He almost giggled and glanced down to the bottom of the list, but froze as his eyes locked with the final name, which simply read, Kitsune. Oh come on! He cried out as he glared at the boy in question. What? That's not a signature and you know it. That's horse crap. It's what I go by, and that is good enough for the seals. Humph, party pooper, Naruto murmured before bending over and scribbling his name as legibly as he could on the paper. He leaned back and titled his head as he noticed something. Hey, wasn't this thing more dirty earlier? That was a personal copy. This one is for the official declarations, Kitsune dryly replied as he rolled up the scroll. As he tucked it across his back, he offered one last bow to Lady Shi. Thank you for your generousness, Lady Shi. I promise he won't disappoint you. See to it that he does not. And you, she said as she turned her glare on Naruto, causing him to freeze up, know this? I shall be watching you very carefully. Are we clear? See crystal? He cried out, bobbing his head furiously. She then turned her glare back at the fox around his neck. I expect you back before 6 o'clock, young lady. We are going to have a very, very long talk. You got it, Mom. The fox shouted back, seemingly unconcerned by any potential punishment later. MOM. What do you mean MOM? Naruto shouted, before Kitsune reverse summoned the 3 of them back to Konoha. Silence finally settled back over the throne room, and Lady Shi turned her gaze on the last remaining occupant. I take it you had a hand in her appearance, she spoke in an even tone, with a hint of steel. I haven't the faintest idea what you're talking about, Your Highness. I would never let it slip to the princess that a potential summoner would be arriving today. Our tutoring sessions are only focused on her education. Lady Shi growled, but he paid her no mind. This is a dangerous game you are playing, you old fool. For the first time since arriving, Huli's face became more serious. Perhaps, but you granted me permission to sort this mess out, so trust in my ability to see it through. I shall. Just remember not to overstep your boundaries. Would never dream of it, he chuckled before offering his own bow and making his way out of the throne room. As the doors closed behind him, he glanced down at the storage seal atop his cane. He pressed his finger against the mark, revealing the dirted scroll Kitsune had given him earlier. As carefully as he could, he unrolled the parchment and glanced down the list of names towards the bottom. A dangerous game indeed. The steps from here on out are going to be all the more difficult. He gazed down at the second-to-last signature and sighed. What trouble are you bringing us, Naruto Uzumaki? Chapter 41, Cheers. That is so cool. Hey little buddy, Naruto said, reaching out before Bull started growling at him. Whoa, whoa. What did I do? He asked, stepping back. Bull, was that really necessary? Kakashi chided. He reeks of fox, Bull replied bluntly as he stared into Naruto's eyes. My clan also has a summoning scroll, but not many people are allowed to sign it. While they are loyal to the clan, the summons are very picky about who they choose, Hinata piped in. Is it your father? Her blush darkened as she stuttered, it's me. Naruto raced up to her and exclaimed, wow. You can summon too. That's so awesome, Hinata-chan. Oh, shit, was all he could muster as the snakes reared up and stared down at him. He glanced up at the massive serpents and only smirked. Oh, they were going to pay for getting the drop on him, especially during his private business. He raised his hand up to his face and bit his thumb. Summoning Jutsu. He cried, slamming his palm to the ground. The snakes stood their ground at the sight of the cloud, and began to hiss as Ryoma's massive form emerged from the smoke. Naruto couldn't wipe the grin off his face as he pushed Churka into his legs to leap up Ryoma's leg. Gone were the days where he could simply jump up to reach Ryoma's back. Now, Ryoma's head was about 2 stories high. "Ready, Ryoma?" Naruto asked, taking his place on the fox's head and running through hand signs. "Affirmative," the beast roared as it began sucking in air. "Futon, raging maelstrom." The beast bellowed, followed by a concentrated stream of blistering air. "Katon, fox hellfire!" Naruto exclaimed as the crimson flame burst from his mouth. The two collided, transforming the stream of wind into a massive flamethrower that tore the ground apart. 2 of the snakes darted to the side, but the middle one was not so quick. It roared as its flesh and bones were seared away by the intense heat. Naruto cut off the jutsu as the other snakes began racing towards them. "They're flanking us. Get ready!" he shouted as he reached for his explosive notes. "I hope the others are having a better time than me," he thought, tightening the grip on his kunai. Naruto shuffled his feet, waiting for Jiraiya to say something. He had been silent for over a minute now, and he was starting to get nervous. After finishing his story, Jiraiya had simply crossed his arms and stared at him. Would he be insulted if he were forced to turn down his offer? The boisterous man could be very hard to read when he wanted to. "No offense, but I'm surprised that you of all people could manage to keep this to yourself. It's not like I ever really had anyone to talk about it with anyways," Naruto mumbled, staring at the ground. "Plus, after I found out about the Kyuubi, I wasn't exactly anxious to talk about it with my team either. I mean, they know now, but it hasn't really come up since then. Besides, it's a little personal for me. Kimi kept me company whenever I got." He fell silent and hugged Kimi closer to his chest. "I see," Jiraiya mused before examining the small creature in the boy's arms. "Those markings, judging by their color, she's from the head family. No wonder he's been so tight-lipped about this. Lady, she wouldn't exactly want her progeny paraded around, especially in our village." After another minute, he finally sighed. "Well, isn't that just my luck? Here I am, trying to have some fun, and Kitsune beats me to it." He cracked open an eye. "And I had it all planned out too. I was going to summon a massive toad and blow your mind." The shocked expression of seeing a summons for the first time never gets old. A light smile lit up Naruto's face as relief flooded his chest. "You're not upset that you have another contract?" "Pfft, no. Only disappointed you blew my fun." "Why would I be? You know you can sign more than one contract, right?" "Really? You can?" Naruto exclaimed, "That's awesome." His eyes grew wide as possibilities flooded his head. "How many can you have at once? Don't push your luck, kid. Honestly, it depends on which clan you're aligned with. Some of them may allow their summoner to work with another, but there are a few who can be quite stingy about it. They can see it as an insult that you would want to rely on another clan other than them. Having one is rare enough. 2 is as far as I'd recommend." Oh. That sounds like fun," Kimi exclaimed, squirming out of Naruto's arms. "Let me go check with Mom." With that, she disappeared with a pop. "Will the toads really be okay with me having 2 contracts at once?" Naruto asked nervously. Jiraiya placed a hand on his chin. "A couple of them can let their egos get in the way, but the majority of them follow a more pragmatic mindset. Barring signing with the snakes, if it would help increase your abilities, I'm sure they'd allow it. The foxes, on the other hand." Naruto opened his mouth to respond, when he was suddenly whisked away in a puff of smoke. He was caught off balance as he reappeared and gulped as he found himself inches away from Lady Shi's scowling face. "Naruto! Naruto! I talked with Mom," Kimi exclaimed as she bounced on top of Lady Shi's head. She was so excited she choked on her wine. Naruto weakly chuckled and winced at the sight of Lady Shi's massive teeth. As spirited as Kimi was, sometimes she could be even more oblivious than him. It was part of what helped them match each other's energy. "Anything you would like to tell me, boy?" she growled, fixing him with her patented glare. Naruto gulped and responded, "Well, Your Highness. I was just offered the chance to sign another contract, and I was curious if you would, permit me to accept 2 at the same time." He winced as he enunciated the final word, and waited for her response. "Are the foxes suddenly not good enough for you, Uzumaki?" she asked in a chilling tone. No. Not at all. I just thought. Naruto, my boy. When did you get here? The occupants of the throne room glanced towards the entrance as Huli shuffled into the room. Lady Shi, looking extravagant as always, Huli called out as he made his way towards the ensemble. She scowled at his coincidental arrival, but remained silent as he made his way across the marble floor. I was curious as to where my student had run off to. I look away 1 second, and she's gone the next. He chuckled as he came to a stop next to Naruto and tapped his cane on the ground. So, what sort of trouble have you gotten yourself into today, my boy? Ugh, well, I was just explaining to Lady Shi that I was offered. I mean, asking permission to sign another contract. He gulped as Lady Shi returned her glare on him. Sounds like a splendid idea. Which clan has offered you a position? Huli cheerfully replied, ignoring the growing irritation on Lady Shi's face. The T-Toads, sir, he stuttered as he noticed Lady Shi's fur rise up in aggravation. Excellent. What a wonderful opportunity. It's been years since I last chatted with Fukusaku. I don't see any problems with that. The Toads are one of the most respected and oldest clans in existence. Some of their members are even 3 times older than I am. Are you quite finished? A chilling voice boomed through the room. Naruto flinched, but Huli remained unsettled. Oh, calm down, my lady. You know as well as I do that the ability of our summoner reflects our clan as a whole. Wouldn't it be prudent for him to have access to as many resources as possible? We both know the Toads would have a lot to teach him. Come on, Mom. Please. I want to make a new friend. Kimi chanted as she leaned over her mother's head and gazed into her eyes. Lady Shi remained silent. Naruto played with his collar as he watched her tails twitching in agitation. He didn't know what he had done, but ever since his first encounter with her, he could tell he was on her bad side. Humph, do as you wish. Naruto let out a sigh of relief and offered her a bow. Thanks a lot, Lady Shi. I appreciate it. He yelped as she grew close to his face once again. Do not test the limits of my patience, Uzumaki. Now get out of my chamber room, she growled as he disappeared in smoke. She twisted her head and glared at Huli. That goes for you too. Huli simply nodded with a smile, and motioned for Kimi to join him. Come along now. We have work to do. Kimi nuzzled her mother's head once more and leapt off, before racing out the door. After waiting to ensure she was gone, she spoke in a more hushed tone. I don't know what game you're playing at, but I am willing to let it unfold. For now. However, if I feel it has gotten out of control, even for a second, you will explain yourself, elder or not. As you wish, my lady, Huli replied with a more genuine bow, before exiting the room. Jiraiya sat in the shade enjoying the breeze as Naruto popped back into existence in the center of the field. Ah! You're back. Judging by the lack of scorched flesh, I take it things went well. Naruto nodded and flopped onto the ground with a sigh of relief. Women are scary, he trembled. Tell me about it, Jiraiya mumbled as a particular blonde came to mind. He shook his head and began unrolling the massive scroll. So ready to get this show on the road? Naruto took a minute to get his breathing under control, before getting up and jogging over to the old sage. He knelt down on the grass and bit his thumb, before scrawling his name across the page. That should take care of that. Let's see what you can do, Jiraiya said as he rolled up the scroll. Naruto nodded and was about to begin but paused. How do I know which contract I'm going to summon from? You know how you can choose which specific fox you want to summon? Jiraiya asked, which earned him a nod. Same basic principle. Just concentrate on a toad and that's what you'll get. Got it. Naruto ran through the motions and slammed his hand on the ground. The smoke cleared, revealing a small, orange toad, which simply said, yo. As the two began to excitedly chat, Jiraiya withdrew to his thoughts once again. Now isn't that something else? He managed to summon Gamakichi on his first try. I know he's had some experience, but still. He watched as Gamakichi hopped on top of the boy's head, causing the boy to laugh. As the two began conversing about the Chunin exams, Jiraiya narrowed his brow as a new thought entered his head. To think, he has not one, but 2 personal summons directly linked to boss families. That is unprecedented. Humph, well isn't he something special? He chuckled to himself before calling out, alright you two. You two can gossip all you want in your spare time, but if I remember correctly, we have work to do. The pair grew silent and Naruto stood at attention. Gamakichi gave Jiraiya a mock salute, causing the old man to sigh. He motioned the boy to sit and shortly followed suit. Now, before we can begin training, we have to know what should be our focus. Let's talk about your matches. Which do you think is going to be more difficult? Naruto grew silent as he compared the two in his head. While Sasuke might have been facing the most dangerous, singular opponent of the tournament, he, himself, certainly had the more difficult lineup. While it still stung to admit, Kakashi-sensei was smart to focus training Sasuke instead of him. With Jiraiya, he arguably had the better instructor of the two. EHL was going to be tricky simply because there was so little he knew about him. The guy was lightning fast, no pun intended, and his match had ended so quickly it was impossible to tell what he had done or what else he had up his sleeves. He had a faint idea thanks to Niji's Byakugan, but it was all really guesswork. Speaking of Niji, just the thought of the guy made his blood boil. He couldn't stand the guy's pompous attitude and he still held a grudge from their interaction in the forest, but that wasn't really what set him off. Despite what many people would say, Naruto was more observant than people thought. He was not ignorant of how Hinata reacted whenever the boy in question was brought up. He didn't know exactly why Niji carried a chip on his shoulder, but whatever it was enough to make her flinch at the very mention of his name. And that pissed him off. Niji, Naruto growled. Is that what you think? Or is it your feelings getting in the way? You don't want to spend your time preparing for one opponent, only to be knocked flat by the other. Naruto took a breath and shook his head. No, definitely Niji. As awesome as Sakura-chan has become, she is at a severe disadvantage to Niji. Due to his Byakugan, she'll be unable to utilize her strength in Genjutsu. Unless she is able to pull off something incredible, I see it being a short match, which means Niji will have used little chakra and will recover whatever stamina he loses before our fight. His eyes steeled and he looked Jiraiya in the eye. While I'll admit nothing would please me more than wiping that grin off his face, I won't let that cloud my judgment. Jiraiya nodded. Well said. Naruto gave him a confident grin. Besides, it's not going to be just one-on-one, he laughed, patting Gamakichi on the head. Oh really now? Just signing me up for the action? Oh, what the heck? Sounds like a blast. You can count me in, Gamakichi grinned. The two shared a high five before turning back to Jiraiya. So what's first? Well, if you two are so adamant about working together, you are going to need some practice. Jiraiya sat down and raised 4 fingers. Aside from that, there are 4 things that I plan to cover with you. 1. We are going to do something about that taijutsu form of yours. Before Naruto could argue, he cut him off. Granted, you've certainly gotten better since the last time I saw you. From what Kakashi has told me, you are leaps and bounds ahead of where you were when he first met you. I'm not saying it's bad, but it could use some work, especially considering your opponents. Naruto held back his argument and let the old man continue. Thanks to your teammate, you've had more exposure to the Juken form than most would. You'll know what to expect, but that doesn't mean you'll know everything. There is a reason why he was ranked as the top genin of his year, and as eccentric as his sensei may be, there is a reason that man is credited as the greatest taijutsu master in all of Konoha. You've seen the results of his work firsthand in your preliminary match, and you can bet that the Hyuga wasn't sitting on his ass during their practices. Naruto fell silent as the bruises from his match with Lee reminded him just how effective Guy's teaching was. And you can bet that the Kyumo-nin also is proficient in taijutsu. You're fast, but he was on another level. Hopefully, by the end of this month, you'll at least be able to keep up with him. Determination gripped his chest as he nodded. Good. We'll leave your clones to work on your forms, and you'll work with me on conditioning. Next, you are going to leave only 2 clones max to work on your Fuinjutsu studies. Don't want to overload your brain on top of the physical exhaustion. Oh! By the way, thank you so much for teaching me about marking. It's incredible. I wouldn't have been able to beat bushy brows without it. Naruto exclaimed, cutting him off. Good to hear you're putting it to good use, Jiraiya chuckled. 3rd, ninjutsu. You have a decent repertoire of jutsu under your belt thanks to Kitsune and Kakashi, but there's always room for expansion. Due to our limited timetable, we are only going to work on 2. Naruto deflated at that, but Jiraiya pressed on. One of them was given to me by Kitsune, which earned a smile from Naruto, and the other. Jiraiya cut off as he held up his hand. Naruto and Gamakichi fell silent as they watched blue chakra begin swirling in his palm. Neither could take their eyes off of the jutsu as Jiraiya rose to his feet. They were enchanted as the man walked over to the closest tree and slammed the orb into the bark. They barely even blinked as the spinning orb drilled away at the bark, sending splinters flying. After 5 seconds, Jiraiya removed his hand, revealing a perfect hole in the tree. Is going to take up most of your time. Naruto was silent as he digested all of this information. A million questions were buzzing through his head, but one was nagging above the rest. And the fourth thing? Jiraiya walked over and gave him a serious stare. It's about time you learned how to call the Kyuubi's chakra. I'm sorry to hear your daughter didn't make it past the preliminaries, Inoichi. Don't remind me. I'm proud of her for even making it that far, but that smug grin on Shikaku's face is driving me crazy. He won't say anything, but he's holding it over us that his son made it. It's infuriating. Yoshio chuckled and slapped the man on the back. Well, her loss should motivate her to work harder. I'm sure her loss will actually be better for her in the long run. Here's to her future. The two tapped their cups together and downed their drinks in one gulp. Yoshio set his glass down and leaned forward. Now, I don't think you invited me to the bar just to discuss your daughter. What's up? 2 things actually. First off, since it involved your company, I thought you'd be interested to know we may finally have some answers regarding the IWA Nin soon. Yoshio's face remained neutral as he leaned back. Really now? What's changed? From what you've told me, some seal thing like what that blonde-haired boy performed is keeping you from accessing his memories. It was and it has been a bitch to deal with. Luckily, Jiraiya-sama was able to take a look at it, and he should be done within the next day or 2. Well, isn't that wonderful? I'm sure Kenta-san and the company would be very eager to hear your results. Agreed. I'll pass on what I can to you when the Hokage permits me. It has to be declassified before I'm technically allowed to tell you. Yoshio was quiet but nodded in understanding. And the second thing, well, as one of the more prominent clans, we have great seats reserved for the finals. One of my cousins isn't going to be able to make it since his wife is expected to go into labor that week. I have an empty seat and I was curious if you'd like to join me. Yoshio cracked a smile. I'm honored. I appreciate that, Inoichi, and thank you for being so hospitable towards me ever since I moved here. You and your family have really made the transition easier. Inoichi waved him off. Think nothing of it. He glanced up at the clock above the bar and sighed. Ugh, I'm glad I was able to catch you, but it seems I have to get going. Oh, come on. Stay and have another drink. Yoshio smiled. Inoichi chuckled as he stood up. Trust me, I'd love to, but I have 6 packets of paperwork to finish tonight, and if I don't start now, I'm going to be up until 2. I'll send you those tickets in the mail. You're going to love it. VIP and everything. I'll catch you later. He offered the man one final wave before he exited the bar. Yoshio lowered his hand, and remained quiet for several seconds. After a chuckle, he waved over the bartender for another shot. Everything was going so perfectly it was almost pitiful. He had expected so much more from the illustrious Konoha. The only real obstacle he had faced since entering the village was his first interaction with Shikaku Nara. The man was as brilliant as they said he would be, but even his keen mind could be dulled with enough shots. Still, he was surprised how fast it had taken for them to break the Zaofu's seal. But then again, it really didn't matter anymore. Their insurance was already in place. Inoichi would never find the memories he was looking for, no matter how many times he looked. On top of that, now he had front row seats to observe the biggest threats his village would face in the future. All paid for by the Yamanaka. Cheers, Inoichi Yamanaka. Thank you for your service, albeit unintended, to the glory of IWA, he thought as he downed another drink. Chapter 42, Control. Again. Hinata nodded and wiped the pouring sweat from her forehead. She took several deep breaths before raising her arms parallel at her waist. She clenched her fists and the flaming, blue chakra roared to life. After 3 seconds, the writhing chakra finally took shape into bright blue fangs. As the form settled, she shifted her feet and began pumping as much chakra as she could through her arms. She grit her teeth and fought to keep the shape of the technique from falling apart from the sudden influx of chakra. Hayashi stood off to the side near the porch and watched as Hinata struggled to keep the influx of chakra in check. While there were certainly areas of Hinata's development he had opinions about, her chakra control was not one of them. He had to admit that, even for a Hyuga, her chakra control was impeccable for her age. Still, that would not be enough. Not for what he had planned for her. Since the first day of their training, he had made her repeatedly push her original technique to its limits. By pumping more and more chakra into the technique, it would be all the more difficult for her to maintain the jutsu structure. Aside from working on her chakra control, there were two other reasons he had her repeating this. The first was a flaw that he had noticed in the jutsu, when she had shown him it weeks ago, how long it took to form. When he first witnessed her perform the jutsu, he had noted it took her 6 seconds for the chakra to settle into place. In battle, timing was everything. For a ninja, 6 seconds was a lot of time. For any jounin worth his rank, that was enough time to fire off 2 jutsu. By forcing her to form the jutsu again and again, she had successfully been able to reduce the time by half. The other reason was that he could tell that the jutsu was not finished. Every now and then, she would pump too much chakra into the technique, but instead of falling apart, the jutsu would seem to change its shape. One time, he could have sworn he saw something reminiscent to eyes. Before she could no longer support the shape, she would be able to develop this further as she grew older. With age came larger reserves and greater control. As his mind began to wander, his calm demeanor slowly began to shift into one of irritation as the nagging memory crawled through his mind. Orochimaru knows. 2 words that still sent shivers even down his spine. Ever since the Hokage and Hinata had spoken with him, not a day had gone by without the paranoid thought crawling through his head. He was thankful that his daughter and her team had managed to escape mostly unharmed from their encounter with the serpent Sannin, but the interaction only created another problem for him to deal with. Not only did Orochimaru know about the stone ring, but also he was aware of Hinata's connection to it. That concerned him more than anything. While he was disturbed that the man had knowledge of the stone ring, he could have assumed it was simply due to the Sannin's obsession with ancient texts regarding any clan with a Kekkei Genkai. However, the fact that he knew about Hinata told him one thing: there was a traitor within the clan. And not only was there a traitor, but the traitor was someone on the Hyuga Council. Due to the clan's rules regarding the ring, only they were updated about Hinata's revelations from the monument. While that certainly narrowed down the possibilities, it still left 25 of the most influential individuals within the clan as suspects. He would have to play both filibusterer and detective in this endeavor. To prevent any further leaks, he would have to withhold information from the council, but at the same time, they would grow suspicious if he went too long without informing them of her progress. He sighed as he rubbed his brow. This was going to be difficult. He would need to reach out to Shikaku for assistance once again. He was brought out from his musings as Hinata fell to her hands and knees. She was heavily panting and sweat was pouring from her face. Hayashi glanced at the clock he had brought out with them and was pleased. 5 minutes. I believe that's a new record, he mused. Hinata, I believe that is enough for that exercise today. You may rest, he called out. Hinata weakly nodded and unceremoniously flopped to the ground. She rolled onto her back and simply lay there for several seconds, before reaching out for her water bottle off to the side and draining it in a single gulp. She pulled at her navy mesh shirt, trying to fan herself as she cooled off. Normally she felt embarrassed to wear anything that showed off her shoulders, but this was training and she was at home. Besides, it was simply too hot for her to wear her normal hoodie. After about a minute, she regained her breath and pushed herself off the ground. She wiped her face with a small towel as she made her way towards the shaded porch. She sank against the wood, and sat in silence as her father stood beside her. You lasted 40 seconds longer than your last run. Tomorrow, I expect you to be able to hold out for 6 minutes. Understood? Yes sir, Hinata nodded as she wiped her forehead. Good. After you have rested, I think it's time we got to work on what I promised you. Despite her exhaustion, Hinata immediately sat up. Her eyes were full of anticipation as Hayashi began to remove his normal garb, revealing his own training outfit. Her break all but forgotten, Hinata trailed behind her father towards the center of the courtyard. Hinata excitedly waited as her father worked through his own series of warm-ups. When he finally turned around, she stood at attention as he addressed her. Now, you have been working on improving your chakra control because the technique I plan to teach you takes the utmost precision and concentration. As you know, your mother invented this jutsu, and it went on to be one of her signature techniques. I expect you to honor its legacy and reputation. Absolutely. Hinata shouted, nodding her head. Good. Now, watch carefully. Hinata activated her Byakugan as Hayashi raised his left arm. He closed his eyes and flattened his palm, as he began channeling chakra into his forearm. Hinata didn't even blink as she observed his chakra began to take shape in a wedge at the tip of his fingers, not unlike how Kabuto had formed his chakra scalpels. She watched in fascination as the edges along the fingers became more and more sharp until she slightly jumped back as the chakra shot out from his fingertips, leaving a flat, steady beam of chakra in its wake. Her eyes widened at how calm the chakra was behaving as she gazed up and down all 3 feet of the blade. On record, the clan refers to this technique as the 8 trigrams, vacuum blade. Hinata was silent as she stared at the slender sword of chakra. The more she looked at it, the more a question began to burn in her mind. Tusan, yes? Why is it called vacuum blade? You are not using wind style like in the air palm technique. Hayashi nodded, very good. I am glad you noticed. That is simply the name we have listed on record. The actual reason for the name is actually trudged down by technicalities. He sighed as he gazed at the glowing blade. Your mother simply called it a chakra blade, and that would be a more accurate title, but those already exist. They are special blades that utilize a special metal from Iron Country that amplify the effect of chakra. Hinata nodded. She had looked into the metal when she and Naruto had searched for Sasuke's birthday present. It had been quite expensive, but she was certain it had been worth it. She was sure Sasuke would be able to bring out its full potential. Now, what can you tell me based on your observations? Hayashi asked as he raised his arm. Hinata was silent before responding. Well, I noticed that the chakra isn't really fluctuating that much. It's perfectly smooth. That's correct. That is partly why this technique requires so much control. This jutsu requires several steps, he said as he dissipated the blade. He whipped his arm and a small shower of chakra began flowing from his wrist. He flattened his palm, and the chakra slowly began forming into the sharp edge along his fingertips. As you can see, the first step involves concentrating your chakra and flattening it to the shape of your hand. The second stage. This time, he slowed the technique and the chakra slowly began to push out from his hand. After 2 feet it crept to a stop, and he turned to face her. Involves length. This requires a great amount of control since you must keep the length of the blade the same while you use it. Now, look to the edge of the blade. Hinata glanced to the end and noticed that it no longer had its sharp edge. It was still angled, but the edge was wispy and almost gas-like, as chakra was released into the air. The third stage is the most difficult to master. Now that you know how to make the edge and enlarge it, the final stage is cleaning up the details. Hayashi barely moved as the length of chakra began to compact and shape into the smooth and clean blade. Forming the blade is relatively easy. Maintaining it as you move and think is the true challenge. With time, it shall become easier and easier, but without enough concentration, the technique shall fall apart. To demonstrate his point, he walked over to a training dummy and slashed at it with the deformed blade. The chakra simply bounced off the wood and dissipated into the air. Hayashi was quiet as he burned off the remaining chakra. He stood perfectly still before slashing upward too fast for Hinata to see. The dummy remained still for a second before splitting perfectly in half and falling to the ground. Hayashi turned around and gazed at Hinata, who was still rooted in her spot. Her eyes were wide, and he noticed the usual timid look in her eye was gone. Instead was a raging look of determination of excitement that he had only seen on 3 occasions. Are you ready to begin? She couldn't nod fast enough as she shouted, yes sir. On the other side of Konoha, the other member of Team 7 still present in the city was also hard at work. 24, 25, come on. Come on. Is that the best you can do? You still got 30 more to go this set. Stop slowing down. Gamikichi shouted as he gazed down at his new summoner. I'm working on it, Naruto grunted as tried to ignore the small, but surprisingly heavy toad on his back. To take his mind off his seemingly endless set of push-ups, he gazed out at the field at the clones hard at work. All across the grassy terrain, his clones were diligently working on their assignments. About 8 of them stood in a block repeating the taijutsu forms Ero Sennin had shown him yesterday again and again. Another set of 3 clones was off to the side with several sheets of paper as they worked on ideas for dealing with both Niji and EHL. Finally, he gazed off to his right at 2 clones arguing over something as they tried their best to pop the bucket of water balloons Ero Sennin had left him with. The man had truly set him up big time. Sure, he had a lot to do, but damn him if he wasn't going to get all of it done. Stop your daydreaming. Gamikichi snickered as he smacked Naruto on the head with a tiny fan. Jiraiya wants 20 sets done before we're done with push-ups for today, and I don't see us doing that at your pace. Naruto growled as he rubbed at the red mark on his cheek. Having fun, are you? Don't know what you're talking about, the toad replied with a smirk. Naruto grit his teeth. but continued anyways. He was silent as he thought about his absent teacher. The man had at least apologized, but he was still missing a day of training. He could understand that the man had duties to the village, but he didn't have to like it. What could be so important that they would need him? The three men in the room turned to look at the door as Jiraiya entered the cell. "Are we ready to begin?" "Whenever you are," Kitsune replied. Jiraiya nodded and walked up to the prisoner. He crouched to the ground as he pulled out a tiny sheet of paper. Sealing really was a marvel. 8 square feet of writing all condensed into a tag no larger than his index finger. He reached into the prisoner's mouth and spied the tiny index of markings near the uvula. He took the tag and pressed it against the roof of the prisoner's mouth, before racing through hand signs. He came to a stop and raised 2 fingers, which began to glow with a green fire. He tapped the tag inside the mouth and whispered, "Activate." The markings along the tag combed out and began racing outside of the Zafu's mouth and along his entire body. The jagged symbols above his tongue circled the target before pouncing and tearing apart the previous code. The countermeasures of the IWA seal attempted to activate, but were cut short by Jiraiya's work. After twisting and struggling for 2 minutes, the IWA seal froze and glowed red. The markings all along the Zafu's body lit up as well, before slowly fading away as if they were never there. Jiraiya inspected the man one last time, before pushing himself up. "He's all yours, Inoichi." Finally, Ibiki grinned, as he watched the Yamanaka trade spaces with Jiraiya in front of the prisoner. Inoichi placed his hand atop the prisoner's forehead and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, he reopened them to find himself standing in a dark, empty void. Beneath him was the prisoner's brain, or at least its mental projection. He knelt to his knees and placed his hands against the projection and was quiet as his mind began racing with information. He stood still as the memories flashed past his eyes. He soared through the prisoner's sessions with Ibiki and the last 2 months in Konoha, until he found himself gazing at the struggling forms of Team 7. He had to admit he was impressed. No wonder all of Kakashi's kids had made it past the preliminaries. He took the time to play through the battle, and watch as the genin held the pair of foreign chunin off. He paused the memory just before the Uzumaki and Uchiha lit the man aflame. He had no intention to experience that sensation. He continued to rewind until he found the memory of the full IWA group underground. As they sat there, Daiki's eyes shot open when he heard scratching against the walls and a gopher poked its head through the wall. It was startled when Metal Spike landed next to its head and it wailed, "It's me, you idiots. Hold your fire." Q held Takara's arm to ensure that the brown-haired chunin wouldn't shoot anything else at the poor creature. The jounin of the group knelt before the creature and asked, "What news does Yoshio?" At the mention of the name, the world froze, and Inoichi became paralyzed as a strange sensation washed over him. To the others inside the prison cell with him, it seemed like nothing was wrong. If they had been facing him, however, perhaps they would have noticed the slight green glow that washed over Inoichi's eyes. He quietly mumbled something to himself, before some force motivated him to continue past this memory. The world inside Inoichi's mind melted away and the underground meeting faded to black. In its place, rose a different memory. As it played in his mind, Inoichi began mumbling again. This time, however, it did not go unnoticed. Kitsune sent him an odd glare as Inoichi shook his head and pulled out from the man's mind. "Everything all right?" Yeah. Just disappointing, I guess." "What do you mean?" Ibiki asked, pushing himself off the wall. "I'm afraid we've been looking too far into this. The reason they were sent on this mission is because this chunin has a bit of a big mouth. He pissed off the jounin commander in IWA, and was assigned a high-risk mission deep into our territory as punishment." Everyone was silent as they processed this information. "Something isn't right. This doesn't sit well with me," Kitsune murmured. "Me neither," Ibiki agreed. "This guy was way too defensive just for that." "You sure, Inoichi? It seems odd to me too. Perhaps he was worried we'd execute him if we thought we couldn't get anything useful out of him." Ibiki was silent as he scratched his chin. "Tell you what. I'll set aside 3 days to really deep scan him and play through everything. If there are any hidden objectives in there, I'll find them. I can get started right now. I cleared out my calendars for this anyways." "Well, that was anticlimactic," Jiraiya sighed as he rubbed his neck, "and I spent so much time on the seal." "Oh well. If that's all, I gotta get going. I've got a runt that needs training, and he's probably sore as it is that I had to miss today." "Wait a minute," Kitsune cut in, before Jiraiya could leave. He pressed his thumb against the seal on his forearm, and revealed a small white totem. You remember this? He asked, tossing it to Inoichi. Ah yes, I helped you extract the memories from Ria into this a few months ago, he replied as he inspected the bone-white baton. How are your sessions going by the way? Positive. There was a lot of resistance at first, and quite a bit of swearing, but I do feel as though she is opening up more. She's even made a new friend in the Uchiha, though she's very reluctant to call him that. Really? Jiraiya asked, folding his arms. Oh yes. Anyways, what do you need me to do with this? He asked, turning towards Kitsune. Since we have a IWA shinobi right here, maybe his memories can answer some questions. I want you to take a look for the masked man towards the end of the recording. Inoichi paused as he dug through the memories in the totem. Got him. I'll take a look. Inoichi placed his hand back atop the prisoner's forehead and dove back into his mind. As he waded through the lifetime of memories, he focused on the odd, swirling pattern of the orange mask. It took him several seconds, but finally he found the flicker of a memory, dancing at the back of the IWAnin's mind. It wasn't much, but it was the briefest of a glimpse seen through the crack of a door. The sounds of an argument had spilled into the hallway of the clan's home, causing the younger IWAnin to sneak a glance. There were only 2 occupants in the room. One was a thin man wearing a strange orange mask, while the other was a much more elderly man, with a pointed nose. They were both staring daggers at each other, causing the younger ninja to creep back and quickly make his way far from the room. The last thing he wanted was draw the anger of Elder Yuta. Chapter 43, Face to Face. It was getting around noontime and the mission office was finally starting to settle down. Most of the Genin and Chunin teams had been assigned their daily tasks, and the staff were considering where to grab lunch before the door was violently slammed open. Everyone froze as they recognized the 3 men standing in the doorframe. All non-essentials out. Now! Ibiki ordered. There was a loud shuffle of feet as the Chunin officers quickly made their way out of the room. No one dared to argue or complain. An unsettling silence hung in the air, as the 3 men stared back at the Hokage and Shikaku Nara. We've had a development in our IWA princess case, Ibiki growled as Inoichi closed the door behind them. Kitsune walked forwards, handing a folder to the Hokage. The old man grabbed the top file and glanced down the page before handing it over to Shikaku. The man's sharp eyes tore down the page before settling on the older image in the top right corner. Yuta Zafu, he muttered as the Hokage nodded for Kitsune to begin. After probing the prisoner's mind, we have confirmation that the IWA elder Yuta did indeed have a correspondence with the masked individual who abducted the children. Was this before or after the disappearance of the children? Shikaku asked as he continued to refamiliarizing himself with the elder's file. Can't say for certain, but leaning towards before, considering the age of the prisoner during the memory, Inoichi replied as he lined back up with the others. It was a brief memory, but things definitely didn't seem cordial between the two. The Hokage nodded, finally letting go of a bit of stress. This was a good step in the right direction. Not much, but at least it's a start, Shikaku muttered before raising an eyebrow at a certain piece of information at the bottom of the packet. Yuta is the Tsuchikage's brother-in-law. Kitsune nodded, yes, which would mean that Ria and Tai are his grandchildren, the Hokage finished, folding his hands together. He glanced sideways at Shikaku. Thoughts? Shikaku was silent, before glancing back and saying, it definitely feels like a retaliation of some sort, but the question is, over what? The Hokage sighed as he leaned back in his chair. Well, we have a possible motive and a new angle for investigation. Our next step is still identifying this masked individual. They're the key to getting proof solid enough to bring before the Tsuchikage. He's not just going to take the word of a Yamanaka, but it's a start. I don't want to send the children back unless we know IWA won't point the finger back at us. He sighed before glancing between the two. You both have done an admirable job. Inoichi as well. For now, we need to focus on security during the finals. If all goes as planned, Danzo, Shikaku, and I shall discuss our next plan of action. Dismissed. 3 weeks later. Naruto growled as he stared down at his palm. He fought past the pain of blisters and clenched his wrist as he began swirling the chakra once again. As the blue threads of chakra began viscously swirling, he brought up his other hand and began violently clawing over the spherical shell. Come on. Focus. Rotation. 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 Come on. Finally, the chakra began to settle into shape, and his hand froze as he stared down at the perfect, blue sphere spinning in his hand. His eyes lit up through his exhaustion and he felt his heart skip a beat. All his hard work culminating in this one moment. I did it. His elation only lasted a few seconds before the sphere began to strain without the added control from his other hand, before it violently exploded, sending him flying through the air. God damn it! He roared as he slammed against the ground and tumbled several feet away. He hissed as he came to a halt, and tried to ignore the sharp sting of numerous lashes across his hands and face. He heard giggling off to the side, only causing him to growl more as he tried to push himself up. As he sat back on his butt, he sent Kimi and Gamakichi a death glare, which only caused the two to crack up more. Yeah. Glad you guys are enjoying the show, he huffed as he carefully rubbed at his hands. I'm sorry, Gamakichi chuckled as he watched Kimi trot over to her summoner and start licking at his wounds. Jiraiya stood right beside him, and despite having a light smile on his own face, his mind was still processing what he had just seen. Incredible. To get his far in such a short amount of time. I was hoping he'd just get to at least the second stage, and here he is almost completing the damn thing. Well, in his own way. Jiraiya glanced off to the side at the other clones, which were finishing up their daily routines. The taijutsu clones were practically done already, and the ones studying Fuinjutsu were packing up their tools. Today's training was drawing to a close, and it was about the time that they would usually call it quits. Well, he would anyway. Even though he'd be exhausted, the brat would whine and complain, but eventually yield and they'd repeat the whole experience the next day. However, today he had something different in mind. As he turned to look at the orange sunset, he decided it was about time. All right kid, quit your moaning and get over here, Jiraiya called. Naruto limped his way over towards the man with Kimi excitedly wagging her tails beside him. You know what you did wrong? Jiraiya asked as he folded his arms. Yes, Naruto grumbled as he gently tried to push his hands against his jacket, as if it would somehow alleviate the stinging. Good. As long as you learn from it, failure is always an option in my book. Sometimes a necessary one, if I'm being honest. Anyways, think you have enough in you for one more? And I don't want to hear the stubborn crap. Yes or no? Naruto bit his teeth as he felt for the normally vast pool of chakra in his body. To be honest, he was spent. Today had been yet another fresh hell as they moved on to the next step of the Yondame's jutsu. His whole body felt sore, his hands were a mess, and his normally vast reserves were actually at the lowest he had ever felt them. Yeah, turning in now sounded just fine with him. TCH, fine. No, I don't. Let's call it a day. He knelt to the ground and scratched Kimi behind the ears. Thanks you two for your help today. I'll see you again tomorrow. Remind me to bring popcorn. The next few days are going to be a riot, Gamakichi laughed from behind Jiraiya's legs. I wouldn't be laughing if I were you. Tomorrow, you'll be joining him. Bunta told me he thinks you've been slacking on your own training, Gamakichi, Jiraiya smirked. Gamakichi's orange hue began fading very fast. He sent Naruto a short glare for his giggling before popping in a cloud of smoke. Bye Naruto. See you tomorrow. Kimi exclaimed before nuzzling against his neck, before disappearing as well. Naruto chuckled and began turning to head home, but was surprised when Jiraiya reached out and grabbed him by the shoulder. Ha! What's up, Ero-senin? Despite a brief flicker of irritation, Jiraiya's face seemed oddly serious. Follow me. There's something I want you to see. Without another word, he turned around and began walking into the forest, away from the village. Naruto stood surprised for a few seconds, before jogging after him. He quickly fell in step beside the older man, and was disappointed when he remained speechless. The two continued on through the woods as the sun began to set lower and lower. As time went on, it was becoming more and more difficult for him to see where they were even going. After about 30 minutes of walking, Jiraiya finally came to a stop as the woods began to open up into a clearing. Jiraiya reached up and snapped of a branch from a tree. He lit it with a low-level katan jutsu, and glanced down at the blonde boy. Jiraiya-sensei. What are we doing out here? I believe it's about time we went over our final plan for your training. Naruto went rigid, as he suddenly understood. He felt his back straighten and his exhaustion fade away, as he was suddenly alert. Like I said before, I believe it's about time you learned how to access the Kyuubi's chakra. While that may not be a very popular opinion among Konoha's forces, I personally don't give a damn. While it may sound harsh, kid, a Jinchuriki is a nation's most powerful weapon and its greatest defense. Their presence alone is enough to dissuade any power-hungry ideas. Now, I may not be in favor of this old tradition, but it is how the world is run today. With tensions on the rise, you may be needed to rise to the occasion in a few years. Quite frankly, I would rather you be prepared for the worst possible scenario than take the moral high ground and leave you unprepared. Naruto was silent as he digested this. Although he knew the old man truly cared for him, the words still stung coming from his mouth. It sucks. It's compromise. Something that you'll find a lot of in our profession, especially if you ever get close to truly becoming Hokage. Naruto sighed before asking, why does the world have to be so complicated? Because people are stupid, Jiraiya replied bluntly, earning a light chuckle from the boy. He pressed on, our world is complicated, and it isn't all pretty. It's a violent mess that thrives on conflict and leaves innocent lives broken in its wake. But, from my experience, those who work the hardest to bring balance to the world are usually those who have been hurt by it the most. Jiraiya sighed as he shifted his weight. You got dealt a crappy hand, kid, no one's denying that. Hell, you got my respect for coming out as decent as you are. So understand it when I say that I know the idea of being a weapon sucks. Hell, all the Jinchuriki are given crappy treatment despite their importance. However, I say if you really want to make a difference, you're going to need every tool at your disposal. Despite how it may seem, I think we've already proven the fox has been saving your life for a while now. Naruto nodded and he clenched his fist, as he recalled the intense pain of the hole tearing open his chest. So what's our first step? Jiraiya nodded as he motioned him to follow him. As he came to a stop, Naruto grew incredibly tense as he finally noticed the gaping chasm in front of them. You already completed the first step. For you to access the Kyuubi's power, you need to have your own reserves tapped out. For the second step, you're going to need a strong motivator for the fox to willingly give up his chakra. How are we going to do that? Naruto asked as he peered his head over the side and gazed into the darkness. Like this, Jiraiya replied before giving him a swift kick to the back. Naruto's eyes popped out of his head and air filled his lungs as his screams echoed off the jagged spikes of the chasm's walls. He flailed as he desperately tried to grab hold of an edge. He yelled in pain as a sharp edge slashed across his hand, reopening the cuts from his attempt at the Rasengan. His eyes sent a pleading look at Jiraiya, and his heart sank as he stared back at him. He could see it in his eyes. He was not going to jump after him. He was on his own. He cried out once more as he was swallowed up by the darkness. Naruto's eyes shot open and he jumped up from the ground. He landed with a loud splash, causing him some confusion as he pressed his back against a stone wall. His eyes shot in every direction. His mind racing a mile a minute. What the? Where the hell am I? He whispered as he glanced at the pipes hanging overhead. I was falling. He pushed me. How? How did I get here? He asked a little louder as he began pushing himself off the damp wall. As his heartbeat began to return to normal, his mind started to pay attention to the tinier details around him. As he glanced at the ground, he noticed the ankle-high water was flowing off to his left down the dark corridor. Maybe it was his hyperactivity, but he felt some strange pull and he decided to follow the stream. It led him through a maze of tunnels, weaving through the immense sewer system, until he turned a corner and found himself facing a steel door. Cautiously, he made his way towards the door and slowly raised his arm to the handle. After a deep breath, he twisted the knob and opened the door into a massive room. It honestly reminded him a bit of Lady Shi's throne room, though she'd eviscerate him if she ever heard that. It was only because of its size. He tilted his head and tried to see the roof of the room, but it seemed to stretch off into nothingness. As he gazed down the corridor, he spotted some shape off in the distance. He waded his way through the room and began to make out a massive red cage. As he came up to the bars, he reached out and ran his fingers along the smooth, yet cold surface. What is this here for? He muttered to himself. He instantly regretted asking that, and he nearly wet himself as a massive bloodshot eye opened up within feet of his face. Horror struck him as a massive set of teeth broke out in a grin that pierced through the blinding darkness. He jumped backwards and landed on his back as a massive, orange hand slammed against the bars. He gazed up at the massive claws, which retracted back into the cage, as the dark form began to rise up. He was immobilized as the towering figure rose above him. Its eerie smile never left its face as it gazed down, almost as if it was studying him. A dark chuckle echoed off the walls of the room, as he shakily rose to his feet. The dark face leaned close to the bars, finally granting him a good look at the creature's face. Finally! Here we are. What the hell are you? Naruto shouted as he gathered his courage. Hee. Care to venture a guess? There aren't many other individuals sharing your body last time I checked. Naruto was silent before his eyebrows narrowed and he growled. So you're the Kyuubi. The creature seemed to bow in mock respect as it leered down on him. So, we meet at last. The child host wrapped up in so much trouble. Naruto frowned as the immense, dark form stood up and stretched, before pacing across the length of the bars. What do you mean by that? The deep voice chuckled through the darkness. I may be trapped in here, but that does not mean I am ignorant of the outside. I can see through your eyes. Hear through your ears. I notice things you cannot possibly imagine. I hear through these walls for the whispers echoing throughout your pathetic village. Stop with the riddles already. What did you mean by trouble? The beast came to a stop and began to comfortably lay down at the far edge of the cage to Naruto's left. Where to even begin? The lost boy, left alone in a village that hates him. Forever to be an outcast. Chasing after an impossible dream that will never come true. Naruto shook his head as he ran down the length of the cage until he was in front of the beast's nose. You're wrong. I'll prove them all wrong. I already have people that accept me for who I am. You mean those two you consider a family? That wretched Uchiha and the girl? Do you really know that they think of you the same way? His mind flashed back to their night in Wave as Hinata pulled all three of them into a tight embrace. He remembered the tears he had shed, as they huddled together and accepted him. Yes. I do. You can't shake my belief in them that easily. The beast chuckled as it leaned towards the bars, causing Naruto to unconsciously take a step back. If that's what you want to believe. Well, let's see if your faith in them will persevere as they confront their own demons. What do you mean? What's wrong with Sasuke and Hinata? Tell me. The fox laid its massive heads back on its paws as it closed its eyes. However, its unsettling grin never left his face. What's wrong with the Uchiha, you ask? Where to start? A boy unable to heal from the tragedy of his family, branded by that cowardly serpent to be his slave, and of course inheriting the weight of his family's legacy. That clan has forever been marred by tragedy and sin. It is only a matter of time before he follows in their footsteps. Somehow the creature's grin seemed to double in size as he reopened his eye. And the Hyuga? The quiet, innocent girl whose entire life is full of disappointment and secrets. What do you mean? Hinata tells us everything. Everything. Naruto nodded as he slammed his fist against the cage. She does. Just you watch, me and Sasuke are going to help her solve that stupid scroll. We don't keep any secrets from each other. Really? As I recall, the Uchiha was the only one who refrained from sharing anything that night you treasure so much. He still hasn't shared why his is unable to let go of the past. As for the Hyuga, well, she holds secrets even she is unaware of. An intricate game is being woven around her, and it shall be interesting to watch it unfold. What game? What are you talking about? I told you before. I can see things you could not possibly see. I can sense the factors at work here. She is at the center of something bigger than she could possibly imagine. It involves the Uchiha, you, and even me. To what extent, even I don't know. However, I am very curious to see what he has planned. Naruto was left speechless as the Kyuubi drew his speech to a close. Now, I believe you came here for a reason. To be fair, I might as well pay a tribute to my humble host. Naruto grew wary as red chakra began seeping through the bars of the cage, and before he could move it rushed forward and engulfed him. He fought as his body was restrained by the red glow, but could do nothing as the chakra began pouring through his system. It was exhilarating. He had only felt power like this once before, but he had been too crazed to truly remember it. Take this gift and remember, we will be in touch. Good luck not skewering yourself on your fall down. Now get out. That's it for part 10. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.